In the last episode, we've built the 2020 version of the sub 500 euro PC. But for those who didn't watch the video, we've used a Ryzen 3600X, a Palette GTX 1650 Storm X, a ASRock B45M HDV Rev 4, 8 gigs of crucial DDR4 2666 RAM, and from Intertek the B48 case as well as the SL500 power supply. So now that the build is finished and the benchmarks are complete, let's take a look at the performance. So right off the bat, I have to say that the PC doesn't perform so bad at all. Of course, right now we have only two different builds in our charts, the random machine and this 500 euro build, so comparing the two is a bit unfair, but we have to work with what we got. So coming to these synthetic benchmarks. In PCMark, this build scored an average of 5,600 points, which is around 20% less than the random machine with its i9 and 2080 Ti. The same behavior can also be found in the total score for NovaBench and PassMark. To finish off the global scores, 3DMark scored the new build with 3,500 points, while the random machine got over 13,000 points. But this is due to 3DMark's heavy GPU reliance. Now on the CPU side, Cinebench scored an average of 3,600 points, while PassMark and 3DMark's CPU performance suggests a similar behavior. So from a CPU standpoint, this PC is of course completely outperformed by the i9, but looking at the price tag of both chips, the results are much better than expected. It gets a bit worse if you look at the GPU performance. In 3DMark, this build scored a total of 3,300 points for the whole benchmark, which is significantly less than the 2080 Ti's total of 14,000 points. But as already said, this was completely expected and should not wonder anybody. And of course this behavior repeats itself with the 30 FPS in 4Mark and the 13 FPS in Engine Superposition. For PassMark, the 3D score was again outperformed by a margin, while 2D scores, which is heavily reliant on CPU performance, is again around 20% under the i9. For the RAM, PassMark, IDA64 and NovaBench all suggested that the 8 gigs of crucial RAM is about 33% slower than the Vengeance found in the random machine. The SSD benchmarks are of course completely out of proportion due to the fact that the M.2 SSD from this build relies on SATA while the other one is NVMe. So we did make the test, but take it with a grain of salt. Now, synthetic benchmarks are not always showing off what a machine is really capable of. So looking at the in-game benchmarks of a couple of games reveals a much bigger picture. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, leaving the anti-aliasing on TAA and gaming on low in 1080p, the 1650 pushes 70 FPS on average, which is not bad indeed. The numbers are starting to diminish once you start to crank up the quality, with 47 frames on average while playing on the highest setting is still a pretty good result. But once you turn up the resolution to 1440p, even on low, the 1650 barely scratches the 50 FPS mark, and then becomes just unplayable if you decide to play on medium. In Metro Exodus, a very similar behavior can be found, with 1080p on the low preset settings, allowing for a 71 FPS average smooth experience. After cranking up the quality, the experience starts to worsen, and after high, the game just becomes unplayable. In 1440p, it looks worse with the average of 55 FPS on low and on 30 on normal, which is just the end of the barrel. But because the built-in benchmark tests don't give the full experience, we have also fired up some games. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, playing at 1080p on low, the 1650 gives a great experience with something around 60 to 70 FPS. And even in the highest settings, we can still expect to have 40 to 50 FPS on average, which is still acceptable. While 1080p sounds fine so far, playing at 1440 on low gives a okay-ish experience with 50 FPS, but once you try the medium setting, it just falls quickly down to 35-ish. Now, an unexpected result was GTA 5, where even in 1440p with almost everything cranked up except for the MSAA, which is just left on 2x, the frame rates just stay over 50, which is an excellent result. The same thing can be found in Crysis 3, where even with high settings and 1440p resolution, as long as the anti-aliasing is left on somewhat low, the experience always stays very pleasant with around 40 to 50 FPS. For 1080p gaming, we could crank up everything to high, even with anti-aliasing turned up, the game just managed to keep up with 50 FPS, which is an excellent result for such a small GPU. Now, of course, this can't be all for this machine, so we fired up Afterburner and Ryzen Master and started to play around. For the 3600X, we managed to keep it stable at 4.2 GHz, and we also gave the 1650 a small boost. The synthetic benchmarks did change a bit, around 200 points in PCMark and 100 points in Cinebench, and the same behavior just can be found in each and every benchmark test. But where the overclock starts to shine is with the built-in game benchmarks. For each and every test that we repeated, we could always squeeze out a couple of FPS. And the exact same thing happened with game testing. Even if it is hard to recreate the exact same in-game test, you can just feel the 5 to 7 FPS increase throughout the gaming. So what does all of this mean for this build? Well, looking at the results and the gaming experience, I must say that I am pretty impressed. Not only can I play whatever I want, assuming that it's only 1080p, but the machine is snappy, boots up just as I expected it to, and for 500 euros it's incredibly cheap. And after looking for the factory assembled machines in the stores in my area, there is no offer that is even near the compute power of this thing. Of course, you could always have done a couple of things differently, but for 500 bucks I think we nailed it pretty good. So to recap all of this, no, it's not a high-end gaming machine by any means. Yes, it is capable of running whatever you want in 1080p. And with the 3300X already inside, down the line you can just swap out the GPU, throw in some RAM, and this thing will be performing well for the next couple of years. So I would say this project is a success. And we hope that you've liked this kind of videos. And if you want, tell us your opinion with the thumb down or thumb up button, and tell us what you would have done differently for this kind of build, because we are excited to hear different opinions and approaches. So again, we would like to thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and click the notifications button to get notified when we do another build. And hopefully we will see you in the next video.